Hi, you're watching DNA Today, a multi award winning genetics podcast where we explore everything to do with genetics, from CRISPR to rare diseases to new research. We have won the Science and Medicine Podcast Award for many years now. We have hundreds of episodes, and we really hope you enjoy these conversations where we dive into so many genetic concepts. I'm Kira Deneen, a certified genetic counselor, and your host. Submitting a research paper for publication can be an overwhelming process, especially for early career researchers. How do you choose the right journal? What are editors really looking for? And how can you improve your chances of acceptance? In this episode, we're answering all these questions and more. We're joined by Dr. Lei Lei, Senior Manager of Wiley's Advanced Portfolio and Deputy Editor of Advanced Science, and Dr. Alanna Gannon, Deputy Editor of Advanced Science and Advanced Healthcare Materials. They'll share insider tips on navigating the peer review process, selecting the best journal for your work, and setting yourself up for publishing success, whether you're submitting your first paper or your 10th. So thank you both so much for coming on the show. I have never been published, so I have a lot to learn in this conversation.
Thank you for having us, Kira. It's a pleasure to be on here today.
Yeah, it's a great honor to join you today.
Yeah, well, I'm going to learn so much in this. Sometimes I do interviews and I know of at least part of what people are going to say, but here I'm learning right along with the audience. So I'm really excited, and hopefully I can pass this along to students that are also looking to publish their thesis project and other ways that I've been involved. And maybe eventually, I'll be published. Let's hope, right? I'm young. I'm only nearly 30s. We'll see. So just getting started on publishing, what are the key things that researchers should consider before submitting a paper to a journal? So really just baseline information.
I think researchers have more to say on this point than us. And as I was a researcher before being an editor, I think I'm happy to share some key considerations so when researchers consider before submitting a paper to a journal. I think usually the research questions, data, and findings are the key to start. Usually we think exciting findings are from really a good scientific question. And that's what researchers are usually thinking of in their daily bench work. And also some thoughtful experimental design and taking into account of any need for statistical analysis. That's a really important part before submitting a paper. If you need, like, for example, 3 technical replicates or several biological replicates, and you only have 2 or less than that, it's not working, and the submission process and peer review process can be very painful. So I would say be careful about experimental design, especially the statistics, before submitting a paper. And also think about the protocols that needs to be well chosen and well executed. You need to reproduce your results to convince yourself first before convincing other people. And also, I think a lot of researchers would like to say how exciting their research is and how wonderful the results are coming from those experiments. But also, as editors, we would actually encourage researchers to do more precise and balanced interpretations. So it's really about research, and good papers are always from good research. And the next step is tell a compelling story. That's the second step after we have good research. But actually scientific writing is pretty simple if we think about the very structured format of a scientific paper. From title, abstract, introduction, results, discussion method, references. That's a very organized way of writing, because scientific papers usually convey knowledge to the audience, and maybe a lot of the audience are non-native speakers, so we don't need fancy language, a lot of jargons. We just want to make the writing really effective and clear, and to pass the key message of the paper to the audience. And also we need to know the audience. I would really strongly recommend our authors to say, know your audience, know where you are going to submit your journal. Are they very specialized in a subject area, or are they general audience that you need to introduce a bit more on the background of your research? And that's the main, purpose, knowing your audience and tell a story to them. But before we decide whether we want to send it out to review or not, we mainly look at 3 criteria. The first is novelty. So as journals in different criteria, like for example, in Advanced Science, as a top journal, like flagship journal in Wiley, we are looking for striking conceptual advance in terms of novelty. That means not the paper come with novel conclusions that change our understanding of the field. When I was a researcher, I would sometimes read a paper, say, wow, this is really important paper. If I can use that method into my own research, that will make my work much more appealing and much more important, and will change my way of thinking how this is in terms of mechanism or the future applications. And the second criteria we're using is the breadth of interest. So whether the novel conclusions are of interest to not only the specialized community, like the scientific community, but also some other related research field. And the third criteria we're using is to do solidity check. So we really need strong support for conclusions. We need strong logical support, mechanistic insights, statistical analysis, yes, statistics again. And also we check the quality of figures and tables. And most of the criteria and key points that I just mentioned are related to the research papers we publish in the journal. But we know there are also other types of articles we usually publish in scientific journals. For example, we can publish some methodology papers with significant technical breakthrough. And sometimes we publish big data sets, which are providing significant resource value to the community. And sometimes we just publish relatively minor progress, but on topics with significant public interest. Think about the COVID studies like 2-3 years ago. That's where we identified with strong public interest. Sometimes our journals like Advanced Science will also publish review papers. And review papers usually have different criteria compared to research papers. And review papers usually look at whether the researchers have authoritative assessment of the field, and the writing requirement for review papers are higher than research papers, as you can tell, because we need the manuscript to be accessible to non-specialist readers. When I was a researcher, I really want to read reviews first when I'm trying to learn something new. And also we need review papers to be timely as well, because if a field is not really developing in the past 2 to 3 years, we are not feeling that it's the perfect time, to write or publish a review right now. And at the same time, we want review papers to be concise because we value the time of our readers. We want the readers to get as much information as possible during their short time of, reading the manuscript. And also good illustrations and examples can be very, very helpful for the preparation of review articles. And at the same time, researchers can sometimes be biased. Every one of us are biased. So we would strongly recommend our authors of review papers to try to make objective and balanced discussions. That's really important for the development and drafting of an impactful review paper. And also sometimes to be forward-looking, say what's the future questions, what's the next steps and how to move forward with the subject area and the topics. So these would be very, very useful to drive more impact and visibility of this topic and review paper.
I'm thinking of everybody going back and re-listening to that as they're starting their paper and then coming back and re-listening to it when they're going to submit it to be like, do I have everything I need? Because that's so helpful in terms of looking at how do I write a manuscript that has the best shot of getting accepted with limited feedback. And I imagine authors are also looking at, or potential authors, maybe if they haven't been published yet, figuring out which journal is best fit for their research. So Wiley has a lot, which we'll get into, but in terms of advice on just how to select which one to submit to, how do people narrow that down?
I really want to recommend a very good tool that Wiley have developed. That's called Wiley Journal Finder. So think about the name.
Great.
It's very easy to use. Just simply copy paste the title and abstract into Wiley Journal Finder. Of course, first Google Wiley Journal Finder, get the link and copy paste title.
We'll put the links in the show notes for people. Yeah.
That'll be great. And then just click search. It will provide a list of journals that your manuscript fits into the scope, and also provide all the metrics, including, for example, the journal impact factor, turnaround time, and whether it's open access or not. And if open access, what's the APC, like article publishing charge? So all the information are transparent, and you can cross compare the journal with each other and choose the right one to submit your manuscript.
I think to add to that, I can give like a brief overview of like the portfolio so that people know what kind of journals we have within the advanced and small portfolio and how they could, fit their research within to that. We have our flagship journal which is Advanced Materials, which has been running for nearly 30 years now and takes the full gambit of research from anything to do with material science. And then we have Advanced Functional Materials, which is functionalized materials, and Advanced Science, which is our flagship open access journal. And that's broad scope. So that encompasses anything from catalysis to full-blown immunology papers. And we get an awful lot of biology submissions. And it's really the home of any sort of interdisciplinary research and high impact, very interesting research. So those are good things to keep in mind of our top tier journals if you're thinking of the advanced portfolio and where to submit your research.
And you also have advanced genetics and advanced biology, right?
Exactly. We have advanced genetics, advanced biology. We have advanced healthcare materials, which is healthcare material focused. We have advanced nanobiomedical research, which is anything nano technology kind of focused as well as biomaterials. So we would really encourage people to look at the Wiley Online website to have a look at the full gambit of journals that we host.
Yeah, because I think a lot of our listeners are going to be most interested in advanced genetics and advanced healthcare materials, if I'm getting the name right. Those two, I think, all are of interest to listeners, but I think the ones that are going to stand out the most, and that if people have papers that they want to submit, those are probably going to be the ones that are the best fit in general of just a lot of, it's called DNA today. We've got a lot of genetics going on.
And advanced science is the home of all of that too, because we've got our big impact factor there with 15 and it's broad scope. So anything that would fit into those journals would certainly fit into advanced science.
To learn a little bit more about the submission process, what happens behind the scenes after an author submits their paper? Can you walk us through the editorial and peer review process of whatever you're allowed to say? Take us behind the curtain.
That's a great question, Kira, because that's something I think even a lot of experienced authors don't know, the precise process that happens behind the scenes. So once you submit your manuscript to any particular journal, it'll come to the inbox where it'll be assigned or picked up by an editor that is experienced in that field. And then the editor has a thorough view of the manuscript. So the first thing I look for as an editor is I go straight to the abstract and I read it thoroughly. And then I'll go to the figures, because we live in a visual society. Figures are very important and they also help illustrate the data and the story that the manuscript is trying to say in the most compelling way. So followed by the figures, then I'll do a thorough check of any ethical requirements, if we have a sufficient N number for all experiments, basically if there is sufficient data to support the conclusions of the manuscript, in my opinion. So then the editor will make a decision regarding the manuscript, and this can go a few ways. So the first decision is you can send the manuscript out for peer review. And that means that you solicit reviews and opinions from experts in that field. And typically you want 3 reviews for every manuscript you put through peer review. Another alternative to this is that you transfer the manuscript to a different journal within the portfolio. So this means that if the novelty or impact of the research isn't quite sufficient enough for whatever journal you're working on, you can transfer it to a different home within the portfolio. And sometimes that means that it's maybe more specialized than the journal you're working on, and it would be better for a different audience. And the aim of this is also to help the researchers reach the best audience with their research, so that it's all about science communication and reaching the right people with this research so that everyone can communicate their work to the best of their abilities. So that's where we help as well. In addition to that, then you can do a rejection of the manuscript if you think it has insufficient experimental analysis or ethical requirements. So those are the 3 decisions. And from that process, then, once you've been through peer review, there are 3 decisions that the reviewers can help you come with. So after the manuscript comes back from review, the editor will read all of the reviews and then make a decision regarding either minor revisions, major revisions, or transferring the manuscript again at this stage to another journal. And the difference between these different decisions is minor revisions, which happens very rarely at this stage, is if the manuscript is nearly ready to go and there's very little input required from the reviewers. Major revisions are when the reviewers then spot maybe experiments that could help with additional analysis to help them convey their story further, or just third-party insight into their research. Sometimes when you're completing your research, you can kind of get into a bubble or one view of thinking. And I remember this from all my years as a researcher in Trinity College in Dublin and then in Harvard for 5 years. You can kind of get down a very singular mindset. And that's why peer review is awesome at this stage, because it gives you opinions from experts in the field that are outside your bubble. So it helps convey, it basically aids with more additional insights into your research. So major revisions help with that, and that's one of the decisions you can have. And then the second then is will we transfer it to a different journal? And this is if we think there is more experimental analysis required than could be completed within a timely mind frame or a timely work frame, or else we just transfer the paper because it would be better suited to another journal.
And I'm thinking also one outcome could be just a rejection as well. If there isn't another good journal to send it to, or there's just too much work that has to be done. Are there any red flags that might lead to an immediate rejection that potential authors should really keep in mind to make sure that their papers don't have that?
Yeah, some of the major red flags are obviously ethical considerations. So if you're doing animal or human studies, the appropriate permissions need to be obtained. In addition to that, the guidelines following animal research need to be followed in terms of tumor size and ethical requirements regarding housing of animals, etc. So those are huge red flags that can get the manuscript rejected immediately. In addition to that, if there isn't a sufficient N number or any sort of large error is found within the remit of the study or the experimental analysis, or even just the study outline in terms of how the study is designed in the first place. These are massive errors that are not overcome. So that means either if it's not an ethical consideration and it's just possibly the paper is too preliminary and they need to add more data, that just means going back and having a thorough look at it and maybe having another stab of it in addition to some more experiments. It's important to know that when you submit a paper, it's not a judgment on this research that you've been carrying out. You know, researchers sit with massive studies for 2 to 3 years sometimes, and this is very close to your heart by the time you submit this work. It's something you've worked on night and day and possibly a lot of weekends. I remember I did a lot of weekends in Harvard, especially when you're working with cells, you know, they don't
of course. Nope.
Absolutely not. So by the time you get to this stage, you're very close to your data. So it's better to look at the publication process and peer review as a conversation to help you improve your research to the best of your ability and also communicate it to a wider audience. So that's why the third-party perspective from the peer reviews who are experts in the field can help you do that, to disseminate the information in a positive way and to help you improve it.
I was approached as a peer reviewer because it was in an area that, you know, I'm more have an expertise in. And it was flattering to get that and to read through. And it was very fun to go through it. And just like a job application, you also include a cover letter, which people may not realize if they haven't done this before. What role do cover letters play in the submission process? Any tips on writing a strong cover letter? Is it similar to a job application in the sense of like, you know, you're showing off like, this is why this research is important and it needs to be published. And this is why it's novel. Because Lei was talking earlier about just how important it is that if you have a research paper, it has to bring something new to the table unless it's a review paper. So what else is important in that cover letter? And is it a traditional cover letter, like no more than a page? Does the other rules apply?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think I frequently been asked by authors like how to differentiate cover letter with abstract.
Yeah,
Because
right?
because both of them summarize, you know, the key points in the manuscript. But as an editor, I do feel cover letter is quite crucial because I want to point out your cover letter will only be read by the editor. So reviewers won't be able to see the cover letter, and it's a special letter that you are communicating with the editor. So I would say in your cover letter, it's more than an abstract. You should definitely introduce your paper and demonstrate why this paper fits the journal, because every journal has their own scope. So we help the editor better understand why your paper is a good fit for the journal and why it is important for the field. Of course, you need to highlight your novelty and contribution in the cover letter. And it's a good place to inform the editor of any potential conflicts of interest, because we don't do that in the abstract. And also in the cover letter, I would feel very enthusiastic when I read something, very exciting from the reviewer. They just convey their enthusiasm to me. And that will kind of, attract me to read the full manuscript with better kind of expectations. But at the same time, I would like to say, do not oversell in your cover letter, because you set up my expectations to be very high, and when I read your paper, it's not there yet, then that's not a that's not a plus.
Don't say it's a landmark paper when it's like,
yeah,
it's good, but it's not gonna, crack that, the most important papers in the century. Yeah.
Yes, but in terms of the length, I think one page, like no more than, one page or more than 3-4 paragraphs, that's too much for editors, because, we handle a lot of paper every day and we want things to be really, really concise.
Yeah, more of an elevator pitch, but in a formal way, kind of.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
that makes sense. And we've mentioned earlier, like open access publishing, and that's becoming more common within journals. What are the benefits and challenges of choosing an open access journal? Because from my perspective, that doesn't know much about this, I'm someone that reads articles a lot. So when it comes to that, I love open access, because then I'm like, oh, it's just here. I can read it. It's ready to go. I'm imagining it reaches way more people because it's not behind a paywall. Although a lot of universities that I still have access from my old universities to access a lot, which is great. I just have that, my bookmarks. If that's how I start on PubMed, is going through that. But are there other downsides that I'm not anticipating right now? There must be.
Yeah, open access is it is actually the future of publishing as we see it, and it was visioned as the great leveler of scientific communication, so that anyone around the world can read this research and it's not behind a paywall. And we know that it increases citations and it increases views of people's research. So it is essentially, the future of how we communicate information. It does, however, place the onus of publishing charges on the author themselves. And that's how it changes the field. So the submitting author then pays what we call an APC, an article publishing charge. And that's where the cost of the publication process comes in. How Wiley is working with universities on this is we have transformational agreements where we work on the library associated with that university has a pot of money at which to pull from for publishing either in open access, or they also subscribe to certain journals. In my view, a major positive for research around the world, because it goes beyond just publishing your paper on a online repository, because it's also post peer review. So it's a fully reviewed paper, legitimized research. Some of the negatives is it's not feasible for everyone to publish open access if they don't have sufficient funds within their university. And also sometimes this can gear towards underrepresented groups or underfunded areas of research, and therefore it can lead to a discrepancy between represented researchers. From an editorial perspective at the moment, we look at this on a case-by-case basis. If you have a compelling story to tell, but you're an underfunded researcher in a particular area, it's always better to reach out to the journal and have a conversation. I think some people are unaware that we are editors, we are people behind these websites that you're submitting to. So it's always best to open a conversation regarding this and see if anything can be done.
That's great advice. And just, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask, but what is a range in terms of either with Wiley or just in general of what you see of how much it costs for people to submit to an open access journal? Because a lot of people probably have no idea, including myself.
Publication charge, Wiley have different types of journals. We have hybrid journals and we have open access journals. And in hybrid journals, we have options for the authors. If you want to publish, you can choose to pay and publish your paper on the open access and not pay, then publish your paper on the subscription. So that would provide options for the authors. And for open access journal for like advanced science, we do charge article publishing fee to publish a paper. And for advanced genetics, I want to flag here because advanced genetics is still in the early stage of journal development. So we publish all articles in open access in advanced genetics, and it's free of charge. So yeah.
That's great. So especially if, because I imagine that researchers are taking some of their grant money to then pay for this, and that's part of the process. But if those
Exactly.
funds are low, that's such a great option for people because advanced genetics is newer within the Wiley portfolio.
Exactly. So we
Yeah.
offer free publication for open access for all authors. And
That's
Advanced
amazing.
Biology is a hybrid journal that we give author options. So we have a full package
Options for
in
everybody.
Advanced family.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. I feel like in most of my interviews these days, I'm bringing up AI. How do you see AI tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude impacting publishing and peer review process in the future? Because I'm almost picturing you're taking this paper and you're reading it as the editors and you're sending out for peer review and all that. But is another part of the process already or going to be feeding it to one of these and saying, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Is there already a paper like this out there? Of not replacing what you're doing, but adding it to the workflow.
Yeah, Wiley has definitely embraced AI. We know that it's here to stay. I
Yep.
think within the next couple of years, people will use these tools as commonplace. And we actually have an entire policy that we came out with a couple of weeks ago, I think, at this stage. So we can link that too for anybody who's wondering about Wiley's policies regarding AI. As a brief overview, as long as the human, interfaces with it and takes ownership over the data, Wiley is fine with authors using AI to kind of help with the grammar and writing of the manuscript. It can be especially helpful for non-native English speakers to help improve the quality of the manuscript. But the data itself and the ownership of the opinions and anything that's expressed within the results and conclusions has to be from the perspective of the author submitting. So it cannot replace the author or the researcher in charge of their own work. At the end of the day, they're signing their name to the research. They're responsible for the contents of it, not an AI program. So it can, at the moment, we are okay with it being used as a tool to aid in the progress of communicating the science, as long as the researchers take ownership over their point of view, the data that they've analyzed, and how they're expressing that.
That's very progressive. I like that because I certainly use these tools as idea generation and drafts that I'm like, okay, let's start. Either I've written a draft or, just updating it, especially improving the grammar and spelling and the flow and everything. So it's such a great tool that, yeah, it's here. And I even students that rotate, either through the podcast or the clinic that I work at, I'm like, that's part of your job is using that to prepare for things. As long as you're not putting HIPAA information in there, go for it. Right.
Yes.
I think AI is also useful for editors. Like for
Yeah, tell me about
myself,
that, Lei. Yeah.
because for myself, I use AI to help me summarize the recent progress and also a lot of recent papers because right now AI is evolving. I think the first version of AI, they do not have this online search function. And now a lot of AIs have online search and reference functions. And they're very helpful in terms of getting to know, for example, if I want to know what's the recent development of gene therapy, and AI will help me pull together all the recent publications and do a quite nice summary with those publications, including reviews and researchers. That saves me a lot of time, to get to know what's up there, what's the frontier, and then help me with, the peer review process. Is this manuscript I'm looking at really novel and adding to the current frontier? So that's very useful to me as an editor. And I would say AI would be more useful for what Alanna said, like language editing, not only from the author's perspective, but also from the production side, copy editing or copy editor and proofing, that they can be very, very useful.
It can be. I think in every area of life, it's becoming quite useful as
Yes.
long as we're using it ethically and like a tool and not replacing things.
Yeah.
I wanted to end by looking forward in terms of I have two people here that read so many papers. So you're really seeing the trends and what's happening, especially in genetics publishing that I'm most interested in. Where do you think the field is headed? What are some areas that are very hot topics. Like Lei, you mentioned gene therapy. I think that's such a great example. Like, we've been talking about CRISPR since the show started in 2012 because there was that big landmark paper in 2012. What are other things that should be on our minds of genetics moves so fast? I try to keep up with it as much as I can, but what should we be focused on?
Yeah, I use genetics a lot when I was studying plant science in Penn State University. Honestly speaking, I'm not the perfect expert of genetics, but I did consult our genetics and genomics editor in the Advanced family, Yuming Hu, and she is now the editor-in-chief of Advanced Genetics as well. She told me a lot of things about the training areas in genetics and genomics, and she recently put together a collection in the Advanced family with selected papers from Advanced Science, Advanced Biology, and Advanced Genetics, and we posted on the website of Advanced Science. And I think the key areas she identified including gene therapy, what we just covered, microbiome and omics, bioinformatics and computational biology, and a lot of interdisciplinary study, as you can tell, like the medical genetics. And in addition to that, from our recent conversation, I heard that precision medicine has been a really important topic actually related to genetics and genomics. And we also have a cross-journal special issue developed across Advanced Science, Advanced Healthcare Materials, Advanced Therapeutics, Advanced Nanobiomed Research, and Advanced Genetics on precision medicine. And that's also recently published with a mixed journal collection. And also, we are still very, very interested in CRISPR and gene editing, as what you just mentioned.
Good.
And also, yeah, exactly. It's still very hot and rapidly advancing the field of genetics. And I think some genome-wide association studies, we call it GWAS, also continues to be a hot topic in genetics, especially kind of guiding our future into functional genetics, like researchers identifying new genetic variants linked to complex diseases or phenotypes, and then in the follow-up to study into more biological mechanisms behind these associations rather than just identifying them.
These are the episodes we should plan in the next year, like focus on those topics. Yeah. Alanna, anything to add on your end of other topics? I mean, Lei outlined quite a lot that I think are hot areas of research in genetics.
Absolutely. I think the future of research is cross-collaboration between different departments. No longer are we seeing biologists, immunologists, geneticists working in a vacuum. We see cross-collaboration with material scientists, with engineers, with physicists, to develop the tools they need to further the science in the field, or even materials they need to support their work. So Wiley and the advanced portfolio in particular is really the home of interdisciplinary research. Any of these tools that have been developed, or even the basic science research, has a home within the advanced portfolio, and especially within advanced science. So I would just encourage researchers to have a look at our portfolio and see the cutting edge research that we are publishing on a daily basis, anything from women's health to hardcore chemistry. These are like wonderful topics that have been worked on every day, and it's really the home of interdisciplinary and cutting edge research. So that's where I think the field is going, more and more collaboration, more and more working in cross-functional teams, and that's where hopefully the future of science lies.
Yeah, well, thank you both so much for coming on the show and sharing so much insight, especially I think for people that are publishing or trying to get published for the first time. But then for people that have published many times, also helpful to know like what Wiley specifically offers and just all of the tools, the finder that we talked about. So we're going to link to everything that we mentioned in the show notes. So everybody can go to dnatoday.com and click on this episode. Or if you're listening in a podcast app, just swipe in the right direction, or, up or to the side, and then you'll see all the show notes there. So thank you both so much. This was so interesting to get a look behind the scenes of how papers get published and how people can actually successfully get published. So I so appreciate your time, especially Lei. It's quite late over there. So I appreciate us finding a time that, works for all the countries here.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kira. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks for watching DNA Today. To access all of our episodes, head over to dnatoday.com. We also have a lot of bonus content on there that you can enjoy. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, guest pitches, you name it, send them in to info@dnatoday.com. We'd also really appreciate if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to the show. It really helps more nerds like yourself find the show. Also, if you like giveaways and other ways to connect with us, I recommend following us on social. We're at DNA Today Podcast. We also have a Patreon if you want to be the most level involved in the show. That's also at DNA Today Podcast. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Join us next time to learn and discover new advances in the world of genetics.